What is up? We're going to be talking about how we trained one of our fighters to get his first TKO, improve his power, conditioning, and overall athleticism. So what's up? My name is Nick Lyden. I'm a certified strength and conditioning coach, founder of Athlete Academy, and I run the program Peak Performance. So before we get into this, we need to know exactly what we're going to be covering. So we're going to be talking about what to actually focus on with your training. We're going to give you the proper sequencing of your training plan so you know how to stack and manage your training so you can actually peak right before your fight. And then we're going to break down how you should actually be conditioning for your sport and for your fight so you know it's not just running miles and miles and miles. And then I'm going to break down every single thing inside of the exact training protocol that we use to improve his KO knockout power. So that's every single workout, every single exercise, reps, sets, everything. So just before we get into, this is the athlete that we are going to be focused on and his specific case study. So his name is David Guerra. He's an amateur Muay Thai fighter. And throughout this process, we really dissected, I'll break it down on what we did, but after going through the workout program that you guys are about to see, we increased his leg strength a crazy amount. So he went from about 125, 1 rep max on a box squat to a 345-pound box squat in just a few short weeks. We increased his upper body strength a ton, by about 45%. But ultimately what we worked on was a lot of conditioning and stamina and improving a lot of his work capacity. So feel free to read what he wrote over there about me and about the program that he went through. So before we get into that, we need to figure out like why martial artists, fighters, jiu-jitsu, wrestlers, all of these sports are one of the most underserved sports when it comes to athletic performance, strength training, and getting yourself better. And really after talking with a lot of these athletes, it comes down to what their coaches actually think. So not like me, like their strength and conditioning coach, but more of what their coaches are telling them at their practices, right? Most of them are telling you to avoid lifting or avoid working out because it'll make you stiff, it'll make you slow, and it'll ultimately hurt your performance and put yourself at greater risk for injury, which is absolutely mind-boggling because that is the exact opposite of what it actually happens. So really, why do these coaches tend to speak upon a topic that they don't necessarily have a full understanding on? I mean, they're probably really, really good coaches in terms of their sport. Don't get me wrong. That's not my area of expertise. They're probably badasses. But when it comes to strength and conditioning and it comes to improving athletic performance from a training aspect, they just lack the knowledge and resources to truly give you an accurate answer. Most of the time it's because they have never actually trained correctly in the gyms and are not really competent in providing any good advice. So they'll avoid it because they don't want to give you the bad advice that will actually harm you and take away from their practices, right? And the other thing I've noticed is that they're just really stuck in their old school methods of training, and adding something new really challenges their authority and their expertise, when actually it should be working together with a strength and conditioning coach or an athletic performance coach, and with them, just like all the other great sports do, football, baseball, basketball, all of them work synergistically together to make their athletes perform better. And the other thing is they probably think that you're going to be doing some sort of just like power lifting or like bodybuilding, which is not athlete specific. I mean, powerlifting are strength athletes, but not necessarily like multifunctional dynamic athletes like yourself. And then bodybuilders are aesthetic, right? They think you're just going to build a bunch of muscle, get slow, stiff. And that's just not the case because that's not the type of training that we're actually going to be doing. So here's what some proper training can actually do for you. 1, get you stronger, more explosive, have better stamina and conditioning. Every punch that you throw or every kick that you throw is going to be harder, have more impact, and it's going to take less out of your body and make you less fatigued to actually throw those punches and kicks. You'll be more agile, quick, and you'll not be getting gassed during practices or in your fight when it actually matters. And that's the huge thing for this demographic, is being being strong, powerful, explosive is great, but you have to maintain it at such a high level for such a with high stakes that you need to be able to do that over the course of an entire 5-minute rounds, right? So what is the process? So typically when an athlete comes to me, this is the process that we'll go through before we actually start their training and start making the plan. So the first thing we'll do is we'll assess their current weaknesses and strengths. So typically this is through a conversation we're talking about where I'm taking notes down and we're figuring out, okay, like, like I just get gassed during my fights. My legs kind of fell apart at the end. I feel like I wasn't really kicking as hard as I could, or I didn't have enough stamina, durability, my core strength, whatever it is, right? We'll typically have that initial consultation and conversation and go through that process. So I can start to dissect in the background, okay, if his legs are getting fatigued, late in the later rounds or in the later part of the match, I know that he needs to build one bigger base of strength, or if they're not limiting with the impact that he has, he needs to build a little bit more leg strength, rotational power, right? I'm kind of looking behind or in between the lines of what the athlete's saying. And that's all good, right? So we can get a base where the athlete feels they're at, but then we actually need some of the data and some of the things that are actually happening from a physical standpoint. So we'll take them through an athletic performance evaluation. So the athletic performance evaluation that we go through typically covers a range of around basically 6 pillars of athleticism. So we'll test out their lower body strength, upper body strength. We'll test out their power output. So typically using something like a broad jump. We'll test their speed and acceleration. And you may be thinking like, why do I need speed and acceleration if I'm like a martial artist, fighter, wrestler, jiu-jitsu? Because in terms of speed and acceleration, it really comes down to how much force you're able to apply quickly. So athletes who typically aren't running, when they do start to improve those metrics, like we did with David, it has a big transfer over into their actual sports, just in different ways than you would typically think. And we'll go through some mobility, see if there's any range of motion issues or anything like that. And we'll have that all documented for them. And then if they have it, or if you have it and want to share with me, request film of a previous fight or match, so I can actually go in and look and break down the biomechanics that are happening, seeing, okay, you actually need a little bit more glute med strength to handle and land how you do, or core strength, stability, whatever it ends up being. And then I can kind of dissect and see where they're getting either fatigued or they're not landing. I can look at biomechanics of like their punches or kicks, and see those different aspects. So I have a background before going into and implementing the specific plan, which is what we'd be doing next. So for David's evaluation and starting point, after discussing and talking with him and going through that whole process, there really was a weakness in his lower body strength and power. He had some pretty good like explosiveness, which you'll see down below. But then his upper body strength and his repeat power and conditioning were really kind of where he lacked a little bit of where we could really see a big improvements and have that translate over into him. His strengths, super coordinated, his timing, his muscle sequencing, his mobility. He was really quick and agile and had great coordination with his rotational power, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do, since you're throwing so many punches, kicks, or throwing bodies, right? You're usually pretty coordinated and pretty sound with your rotational power. And what led to his ability to be explosive was his elastic strength, that he had some pretty good qualities. I think he mentioned he was a track guy for a little bit in high school, so that lended to that a little bit. And the other thing that you need to know when programming is like, how much time do I have before the fight, so I can properly set up the sequence for you and for fighters to be able to peak at the right time, because none of this matters unless you peak at the right time. So we had about 4 months, 3.5 months, we thought, and I'm sure a lot of you have gone through where there are some complications, some delays, or things get started a little bit earlier. But in general, we had about 3.5 months to progress him through his training. So with this in mind, I accelerated his plan a little bit, just because he already had a good base of foundation and technique when we went through, and I looked at his videos and in his exercise and how he was moving and his movement quality. So we were able to accelerate it because there was no gaps there. So we can kind of jump straight into a, what would be more of a second phase of training, a little bit more advanced than the beginning. So with it, like I said, with his training plan, it was 4 phases. We did 3 times a week because we were managing his work and we were also managing his practices, which I believe he had 3 or 4 practices a night. And again, with a lot of fighters, like recovery and volume management is crucial. So for him, and I think for a lot of you guys, 3 times a week, especially if you have not been lifting or doing any of that, is a great starting point. So some more of my other advanced like jiu-jitsu guys, like they train all the time and they're just, but that's his style. Like he could just train all the time. It feels like if he's not training, his body's not working optimally. So he's working out like 4 or 5, sometimes 6 times a week. And that's a little bit different. But with the phases that we went through with him, the first was like a foundational strength and power. Like normally it'd be foundational strength and like hypertrophy, trying to get him a little bit muscle for like a typical athlete. But for David's case, like we did not want him to put on too much size and too much muscle because he had to make weight. So going through this, I want you guys to understand that like you can make strength gains without getting more muscle, and that's typically due to central nervous drive. So like how much stimulus you can provide your muscle to lift the weight is really what we focus on. So the reps were a little bit lower than what you'd think, and we didn't really do too much hypertrophy rep ranges, say, except for maybe in some accessory lifts, but that wasn't really to build muscle there with it. The second phase that we went into is a pure strength and power, is a little more advanced. We start to integrate more unilateral movements, which I'll be breaking all this down. And then a third phase was a dynamic force phase where we use something called undulating periodization. So first 2 phases, strength and power. Third phase, we do undulating periodization, which, basically means that we are focusing on one primary goal week every day. You can do weekly, but I found the daily works a little bit better. So we worked on one main high velocity rate of force development day, one pure power day, and then one super heavy strength day to keep that strength engine running and to maintain that high level there. And then our 4th phase was our peaking phase, where we use some really advanced training methods like French contrast training and complexes and things like that. So let's get into it. So the first phase was our strength and power. When we started them off with a upper body strength and rotational power. So in the first few of these, I go through the warm-ups, but then afterwards, I don't include the warm-ups just because they're pretty similar and you guys should have understanding of what they look like. So our dynamic warm-up for the upper body strength and rotation day, the primary goal is to mobilize the shoulder, to prime the stabilizing muscles and improve the muscle contraction. So we did something called the PVC pipe complex, where there's a bunch of different rotations and different orientations to open up the thoracic spine and the chest. A lot of you are super tight in the chest, pec minor, pec major, pec minor, front delt, and you lack a lot of like openness because you're throwing so many punches consistently. So typically you guys are a little bit more rounded forward. So we're trying to open you back up for that aspect. So we did things like our PVC pipe complex. We did band pull aparts, right, where we're trying to open ourselves up. And then we used some isodynamic push-up holds to really get the muscle contraction for him, because he was having trouble engaging his chest. He's really front delt and tricep dominant. So I wanted to prime the chest and have him feel what the chest feels like when it's contracting before going into our upper body workout. And then everyone should be doing YTWs and presses, especially if you're throwing, punching, any sort of athlete that has to use their arms. This will help stabilize and keep your shoulders healthy. Now, we went from the dynamic warm-up and then we came over here and back down to conditioning. Conditioning we always put at the end of the workout because I want you guys to get the most strength, most power development that you can, plus get rid of a little bit of that energy and then put you into conditioning when you guys are a little bit tired so we can increase that threshold and the work capacity there. So for our strength movements, we did some close grip bench press just because, you're not punching like this, right? It's going to be a little bit closer. Now in this phase, we started out bilateral, meaning both hands or both legs at the same time. And throughout this, we'll transition to more unilaterals to get more specific with those movements. Now I did pair this close grip bench press with a unilateral movement just because I wanted to keep him feeling more athletic, right? And not just building just straight power right here. I wanted to keep the plyometrics that we're using to be more functional for him. So we use contrast sets. Typically with contrast sets, I don't like going above anything about 5 to 6 reps. But since this was a foundational phase, 6 to 8 reps is where we're at. But really, if you do anything heavier with a contrast or too many more reps, the contrast set, you get a little bit too fatigued and then your power output, which is what we're trying to maximize with this, starts to diminish. So a contrast set simply means you're doing a heavy compound movement into a plyometric movement or a really power-based movement. So what happens in a contrast set is that you do the heavy strength movement, right? And what that does is it fires up your central nervous system. So it forces you to recruit the maximum amount of contractile units or fibers in your muscle. It sends a huge central nervous system or nervous system drive, so a big stimulus down to the muscles. And it tells your body like, okay, I need to produce this amount of force to lift this weight, which you do with that weight. And then you take a small rest, 15, 20 seconds, and then you go into an unresisted. So your body's like, I still need to produce that force. I still need to be powerful and strong. And then you go into an unresisted so you can help increase what's called your rate of force development, which is just basically how fast that signal goes down to contract all those muscle units. And then you would go in the power output from that. Now we chose the step back shot put throw because I wanted to have some transfer of force, which you can see. So step back shot put throw, you'll basically jump back to the side, push laterally with your leg, integrate lower body from the foot all the way up to the hip, just like you guys are throwing a punch, right? Rotating through and then maximizing the power that you can get from the chest, shoulder, tricep, and arm with that. So the reps are super low on that, not supposed to be fatiguing, max power output. Then we went into just some standard strength for his back, right? So weighted chin-ups. So we're developing his pulling strength. I like the chin-up variation, right? It's going to help hit the lat a little bit more, help target the bicep without doing much like direct bicep training for you. So great for grapplers or anyone who's in a clinch. And then we did some dumbbell pullovers just because, again, the rounded shoulders being super tight, the dumbbell pullover will help open you up and increase the lat length and shoulder mobility and learning how to use the lat through the full range of motion. Again, there 3 reps, 6 to 8 reps. Dumbbell pullovers, we went a little bit lighter, and then we up the reps a little bit so that he can get through the range of motion and start to feel comfortable with that exercise. Then we went on to our rotational work. So this is like a play on the contrast training. So we used a kneeling wood chop, which we go a little bit heavier on, right? It's more strength focused where we're coming down and across our body, really developing our core strength in our obliques. And then we paired that with a standing behind scoop toss. So where you're standing, so the wall would be behind me, I'm standing away. I have a light med ball and I'm getting full turn and rotation, getting good hip shoulder separation and a lot of rotational power there. And potentially increasing your mobility of your T-spine and hips there. So really great exercise. And you'll notice throughout this, there's a lot of core and there's a lot of rotation in it just because that's one of the primary drivers of your guys' power that you need to develop with it. So then after we did a rotational type training for the core, then we went into core stability, where we did some dumbbell plank pull-throughs. It's like an isodynamic type of movement. You're holding a plank, trying not to have your hips or chest or upper body move while you drag a dumbbell across. So there's that dynamic isometric contraction that you're trying to achieve there, in body control. And then we did half Turkish get-ups, which is a full body coordination, shoulder mobility, hips. It's literally everything all in one, to help round out the rest of that training period. Then day 2 was a lower body power, the primary focus on the power. So, we have our dynamic warm up, perfect stretch, lateral lunge, the hip flexor stretch, walking RDL, walking quad, and then again a PVC pipe complex. Just again, this isn't lower body specific, but it was in there to help just continually give him the reps to open up his upper body and shoulders so he's not getting any shoulder injuries or anything due to overuse of throwing punches. Now, typically with lower body too, then I want to take it a step further with the warm-up where I'll do some joint openers or mobilization. So we're trying to open up end range of motion of the hips and ankles here. So we did some banded distraction. So basically a banded distraction is where you are using a band to pull you into end range of motion, and it's opening up the joint capsule a little bit to give you a little bit more free range of motion in there throughout the rest of the training or before you get into the training. And then we went into primers. So our primers, we did some glute or hip circle walks to get the hip, glute me's and glutes activated, some leg curls, some physio leg curls, and then again, some more band pull aparts, just because we are going to be using the back before we get into some of our power movements, because it has to stabilize and maintain that rigidity throughout the power training. So with the power training that we did primarily today, this is another contrast training set. So again, heavy movement. Again, this was a more power focus. So we did around 50 to 60% of his 1 rep max. And we use bands. So we use that for accommodating resistance. And that forces the athlete to continue to accelerate through the entire movement as the band stretches. So that as the band stretches, it'll apply more tension, meaning the resistance gets harder and harder, but you are at a better angle to produce force, so you work through that. I hope that makes sense for all of you. And then we went to a lateral jump to a box jump. So this is working transfer of force from lateral to vertical, with that, again, using the contrast set. Now, next we went into a power and stability complex that we did. So we did kettlebell swings to really work the glutes and hamstring power output. Which you'll see in our next phase, I believe, we needed to work his hip stability and control, because without stability, your body cannot produce the optimal or maximal amount of strength and power that it wants. So if you've ever watched a strongman competition and they're squatting 800 pounds for max reps, typically when you see an athlete fail, it's because they lose joint stability and integrity on the rep before. So when that happens, your body shuts it down. It's like, we're not doing this anymore. You're going to put yourself at injury. No way. But if you have hip stability and joint integrity, you're able to apply maximal amount of force throughout all of the movement. So without it, you're not going to have as much force. With it, you'll be able to produce the most amount of force. So we focus on that before the next phase, so he can actually produce the maximal amount of force. Then we went into more core and trunk stability. So your core is just not your six pack, it's your obliques. There's parts of your lats that go into it. It's your back extensors, QLs. So we were working primarily on the lower back extensors here. Because later we will have some hang cleans and things like that, and you need to have a strong back, as it does help with bringing your body and torso upright and aiding in the power of there, and overall just having a strong foundation for your core. And then we went to front rack farmers marches. So that's where you're holding a weight here. You're trying to control your core, your body, and not shift left or right. So there's all these little tiny little not isometric, but like quasi isometric subtle movements that you're having to control dynamically with that under load to help improve your stability there. Now, again, this is more of the foundational period. So we started to train his hip flexors and bring those up because those were lacking. So we typically we want to start with more of like an isometric type movement, which we did with a sensory iso hip flexor holds to improve the strength there. And then we worked on clamshells and bird dogs just to help improve his strength in his glute medius and overall motor patterning. So how he's using his body and sequencing the muscles in the proper way. So then the third day, we went into full body strength and power. Okay, so we had just more of a power day. It was, I believe it was a Monday, Tuesday, and then like Thursday split during this time period for us. So you did have a period to rest, but we wanted to save the strength till the end during this period. So he had a full time to recover. We were trying to manage his practices and make sure his coaches weren't getting mad at me for having him walk into the practice a little sore and tired. So that's why we held off the strength till the end. So he had a full time to recover after that. So we did high box squats. This is where he got really strong. It was right here. So we started off high box squats. As the weeks progressed, we dropped it down to like 4s and 3s. But we were really trying to improve his maximal concentric strength here. So that's like when your muscle fibers contract. We really were trying to improve that here and improve his power. So again, this is another contrast set with a high box squat to a box jump. Anytime you're doing contrast sets, you want it to be similar movement patterns with similar force production. So this is a very vertical force production using his quads and glutes a little bit. So you want to keep that with the plyometric, which we did with the box jumps. And the box jumps are good because you don't get a lot of like impact, which we will get into later. But again, this is the beginning phases. Then for the strength, we did some unilateral movements. So single arm dumbbell row, you can crush the weight, go heavy, help build grip strength, lat, rear delt. They're great exercises for you, right? Pulling here, there's some core stability involved in that. And then we went to some incline single arm dumbbell press. Again, single arm going up, there's some stability there. Now, after we got to the main strength movements, we kept this power block of the landline row to press. And then there's another variation, but the row to press we kept in there throughout 2 training blocks, I believe, just because there's a really great full body transfer of force movement where they're getting a row into a press. So we're working the oblique sling and posterior oblique sling to help aid some power. We're helping teach the athlete to get some hip internal rotation as the hips come through and open up into that aspect for the transfer of rotational power and coordination. And then we paired that with some standing rainbow men-bell slams to get over the top. Again, more rotational power with that. After that, we went into our plyos. So for the plyos, we did a landing focus. So we're trying to build his ability to absorb force here, specifically in the lateral plane. So helping his ankle strength, his glute med a little bit more. So that way when we get later into some of the skaters that are just more power focused, he has that base for himself. Then we did some banded broad jumps, single line lateral hops. Those are extensive plyometrics. So we're trying to just slowly build his elastic strength and kind of prep his body to be able to handle the amount of plyometrics and power-based movements that we're going to be getting into. And then final one with a forward chest pass that was really about his rate of force development with his upper body. And then we moved on to some isometrics. So the reason the isometrics are in there in this case is to improve like joint specific strength and joints and tendon health, and then also improve some of the elastic qualities. So when you're doing isometrics, yielding isometrics, to really help those tendons out. Again, when it comes to power, you have like your muscle driven power, and then you have like your tendons and your elastic strength. So we were focusing on it and improving the qualities of those tendons to help transfer that muscle driven power throughout the tendon and out the rest of his body. And then For the conditioning, which I'm going to break down a little bit more right after this, we did assault bike sprints. We started off a little bit lower with 10 sets of 10 reps, or 10 sets of 10-second sprints with a 50-second rest interval. So we're really trying to build his alactic and glycolytic repeat power and capacity, which I'm going to go into right now. So when you're conditioning, it's not just like go run miles and miles to get your cardio up or whatever you want to call it, right? True conditioning is knowing what energy systems you use in your sport primarily and enhancing their capacity and repeat power ability for that. So there are three main energy systems. So there's your beta oxidation. That's like your marathon runner. It's like 50%, like moderate intensity to low, and you're just running forever. That's going to help your aerobic capacity and repeat power, which in fighting it's good to have, but it's not necessarily what's going to make you feel fresh throughout the entire fight. So for him, he was 3-minute rounds of basically like max effort, like quick bursts of max effort, recover, but still had to like be involved and keep going. So his coach was having him doing some runs on the side and stuff, so we didn't focus there. Our focus was getting his body to be able to have the intensity that we need and hold it for a long time and use it whenever we needed it. So those two main energy systems that we want to look at are the aerobic fast and slow glycolytic system and the anaerobic alactic system, or what's known as the creatine phosphate. They're just interchangeable. So we think about the ATP-CP or the alactic system. I'm sorry if this is just sounding confusing. I'm going to make it simple. Okay, this is those short, quick bursts, 0 to 10 seconds, 100% effort. You're trying to punch someone's face off, throw a roundhouse kick, whatever it is. That's your ATP system right there. It's a max effort sprint. It's a max effort power clean. That's what it is. Okay. And we need to teach our body to be able to do that over and over and over and over again. Okay. But we also need to teach our body, right, to be able to sustain that and have power later on for 30, 60 seconds out. So that's more of your glycolytic system. Okay. So that would be like still high intensity, maybe not 100%, but you're looking at like roughly around 80, 70, 80, 90% of your max fully fresh effort that you could put out, right? So that's where most of you are going to be at. You're going to be at, as the fight or match goes on, you're going to be needing to sustain it because your matches aren't just 10 seconds, right? You need to be able to sustain it, and you'll have some periods where it's not as intense and you can recover a little bit, which is where your beta oxidation will come through and your ability to, and what's known as your capacity, right? So how much of a fuel tank that you actually have with it. So when we look at the conditioning, that's the verbiage and what's going on there. So in phase 2, now we're able to progress it a little bit more, still focusing on the strength and power. We went into a lower contrast training day. So now instead of having the bilateral movement, now we're going into unilateral, meaning one leg, because as in sports, 99.9% of the time, it's one leg then the other. It's not necessarily both exactly at the same time. It's coordination and timing when it comes to putting that power one foot or one arm at a time. So we went into some barbell reverse lunges. You can see the reps go down, 3 sets of 5 each leg. And then we did some paired that with some similar single leg plyometrics. So the reason why we had, like I was saying, those single leg cable RDLs to rows, that was like purely stability, because we needed to make sure he had the stability in order to handle enough weight for these barbell reverse lunges in his hips, knees, and ankles. So that's how we kind of transitioned that into here. And then for the power, we added a band around his waist, pulling him behind for his kettlebell swings. That's to add in more hip drive and glute engagement and snapping the hips through. It also helped with what's called the amerization phase, which I'll get into a lot. Basically, that is essentially from when your body, that like stretch happens, like the lowering back into the concentric, and that's a like explosiveness. People have that like pop. It's because they have a really good and really fast amerization phase, so they can slow movement and go right back into an explosive movement aspect from there. And then we added some approach box jumps just to help work a little bit more coordination, timing, and elastic components for the box jump compared to just a straight box jump, which is just going to be just more muscle driven power. There's a little bit of that tendon action that's going into there. Then we moved into our core and trunk. So we did some landmine oblique twist. So essentially there's a landmine, you have it in front of you. So there's a little bit of an isometric where you're holding yourself, but it's a lot of rotation. So hip internal and external rotation, you're getting the core coming and you're bringing the shoulders up and around. The full body coordination and power training. You're also coming up super fast. And then as it comes around, you're trying to slow. So you get an eccentric loading that happens that you have to control and then come back around. So again, that amortization phase, or like loading and throwing a punch or kick, right? And then we went into a lateral quick toss after that, which was all about not having that full range of motion, but being able to make or produce a lot of force really rapidly from a restricted position with that aspect. So 10 and 10, again, the volume's a little bit higher to get his technique and coordination and timing down. And then as we go, we add the weights up a little bit and drop the sets down, or the reps down. Now, then we get into our accessory. We added the cable hip flexor raise. So we had isometric, and now we're taking that a little bit further. We progressed that to a fully lengthened position. So his legs fully back. Now we're strengthening to full range of motion. And then our isometric was a heels elevated iso squat. Again, that's just to help with the tendons and specific strength in those areas. And then for conditioning, we went to a full body galactic and glycolytic conditioning for capacity and repeat power. So that's the blue and the red dot, or the blue and the red line. So 10 sets, 10 to 15 seconds. I believe we dropped them down to 10 seconds. But it was 10 to 15 seconds, and that's like the max amount of that galactic system that we could get. We let him recover, and then we took it to a separate body part, so it wasn't the same muscles getting just hammered right there. So he actually could have a little bit better time transitioning through those, but still getting that cardiovascular work and the repeat power work. And then we went to a sled pull into a push where you're like pulling with a rope and then pushing down. And that was just literally 20 yards down and back as fast as you can with a rest in between. Now, the second days are upper strength and rotational. So now, again, we transition, we're taking them to the next step of power. So banded bench press, we usually use a football bar bench. So same, instead of close grip, football bar, same, roughly the same, but we just added a band to it. So now he has to actually accelerate and increase his power throughout the entire range of motion. So it's most of the lift isn't just happening here and then it gets easy. It's consistently challenging throughout the entire range of motion. We paired that with a floor chest pass. Again, that's like the upper body plyometric to increase the rate of force development with his shoulder and his chest and triceps. And then with the strength, pendulum rows are freaking awesome at developing just your back strength in general. It's basically like a bent over row from the floor every time. There's a little leg drive, but not much. Super heavy, 4 to 6 reps. Then we did some banded row iso holds just to improve his endurance, you could call it, and ability and work capacity to be able to hold on to essentially a clinch or in that position. And then we added in some pull-ups after he was already fatigued a little bit, just to increase his work capacity and endurance at the lats for that period. Because that was one of the areas that he said he wanted to work on a lot, was being able to hold the clinch and be able to maintain and like dominate in there, which in the videos that I have of him, he absolutely did. And then again, more core, right? We have farmer's carries to improve grip strength, core stability, strength with some standard planks, but we did weighted planks on top of them. And each week we progressed that, how much weight and time that it could actually do. And then the rotational during this period, we did a little bit more frontal plane. So kettlebell windmill, you're here, you're going down. That's going to help increase, you'll get hip internal rotation, and then you'll start to work the side over here with your QL instead of the back extensors and some of that QL mobility and oblique mobility. And then phase or day 3, again, now it's single leg a little bit more, right? So we have the barbell single leg RDL, progress to a more demanding hip strength stability that we paired with a hip and hamstring plyometric. So strength, stability, speed, explosiveness paired together with that. And we did for our upper body strength, we did some single or some seated neutral cable grip rows just to continue to build the strength there. But then we added in a unilateral movement with the single arm kettlebells press, where you're pressing overhead. You have to control your stability with your lat now that he's opened up a little bit more, and I'm working that area. And like I said, for the power, which is up here, we went into landmine row to press. We just kept it. We dropped the reps down. We increases the load so he can increase his power and transfer that power. And then we paired that with the squat to press, which is a transfer of force from a squat up overhead into extension, so we can learn to sequence that a little bit better. And then with our plyos, before we did some landing focused. Now these are banded plyometrics. Now that he has that down, now we're working on his reactivity, the amortization phase a little bit more, getting in and out with the added resistance so he can produce more force and learn how to produce more force that way. And then we transitioned him to some single leg rocker jumps to really work on that single leg power, and some banded pogo hops. Again, because so much of what you're doing is hopping, bouncing around, especially for like Muay Thai, getting into positions and going all around. We really needed to make sure his ankle foot strength and elasticity was on point. So that's why we had the banded pogo hops, which are just a pure jump with no knee flexion, just ankles up and down as high as you can. And then for his conditioning, we increased the duration to help increase his capacity of the assault bike sprints. And I believe we got up to around 15 second sprints, which is brutal. But the assault bike sprints are probably one of the best things that you guys can be doing to help increase your specific conditioning for your sport, because it's full body, legs, push, pull, arms. It's awesome. Now, phase 3, here's where we start to transition a little bit. So now I was talking about that undulating periodization. So day 1 was a velocity focus. So that's like pure speed. Like speed is the name of the game. Quickness is the name of the game. The weights are not hot, heavy. It's fast, fast, fast. We did start with some seated rocker jumps and band assisted vertical jumps just to get a little contrast there. So seated rocker jumps are going to be more muscle driven power, but the band assisted are going to be like pure speed, overspeed training for you in a plyometric setting. And this is just to prime the body for maximal power output before we get into our next complex, which is our trap bar jumps, box broad jumps, and our kettlebell swings. With those trap bar jumps, before they were banded, now that's no band, less weight, we're getting off the floor. So about 30% 1 rep max or body weight, max height into a plyometrics. And then the kettlebell swing is kind of like a weighted plyometric because of the nature of the movement. And then we took that same principle over to our upper body. So now we're doing explosive sled rows. So we have a TRX band on a sled. We're rowing for max distance and power. And then we're going a little bit lighter on the row machine, because there's not really, you can't just like row a dumbbell super fast, right? This one was a little bit, so you can get a quick velocity pull using the full upper back and lats before we moved into our velocity. And again, here is 4 sets of 5, so power, and then this is super quick, repeat power, max velocity here. And then we went to some single arm landmine press, so quick punches, boom, boom, boom. And then we went into a half kneeling chest pass, so it's just single arm, straight on out. And some band explosive push-ups where the band is actually going to aid you and help you get off the ground faster, so we can work on that rate of force development and speed. Now, day 2 is power. So now that was all speed, not necessarily worried how much weight's on the board. Now we're trying to blend the two together. So what's the heaviest weight at the fastest speed we can get to get the max power out for that? So we did hanging high pulls, which this is really great for emphasizing that amortization phase. because you have to go down, get out of the down position, straight up into it. So we're working the hip right there and the glute to have a quick snap and amortization phase. After that, these aren't done one right after the other. These are just by themselves with long rest periods. We went into banded bench press, a different variation here. And then we went into a banded broad jump, or a kettlebell swing, depending on the day and how he's progressing. And then we went into our acceleration. So we did sled sprints. So these are a little bit heavier than the ones that are later in the program, but right around a 50% velocity decrement. So with that, so he would run like say 0 to 10 yards, and it'd take him 2 seconds. We'd want this sled sprint to take him 4 seconds. So it's doubled the time, or 50% slower. We're starting to transition into more horizontal force so we can round out his power output there. And then the accessories are more unilateral, so single leg strength and power. And then again, some more lateral force production there. Again, the reps are super low. It's max intent, max effort. This one's pretty simple. Day 3 is strength. So this may look simple, like not a lot going on compared to the other ones, but the intensity is super high. So the whole goal of this day is to maintain that level of strength that you just built the last 2 phases, so that you can continue to use that strength for the next 2 phases, or the next phase that we have. So strength is the foundational block before power. So we want to build our strength up and maintain our strength as we progress to more explosive type movements in the peaking phase. So this is just a full body barbell back squat, dumbbell bench, single arm dumbbell rows, barbell RDL, farmer's carries. Everything's basically 5 by 5, a lot of rest. It says 3 minutes here, but it's like 3 to 5 minutes rest, and that's all you do, and you push yourself as hard as you can. Now, this is the 4th phase. This is the peaking phase. This is where, honestly, we had some delays and we had to make some changes and things, but this is the overall phase and how it went. We had to extend it out a little bit and take like a deload week in between, just to keep his volume appropriate and make sure he wasn't getting hurt. But we use French contrast training. So French contrast training is a great way to develop explosive power and maintain strength. You basically work through the entire force velocity curve. So if force is over here, velocity is over this way. What we'd have is that you have maximal force, and then you have maximal speed over here, and then you have power in the middle. Okay, so you work through that entire area. So you have maximal strength, then you go to power, then you go to speed strength is what it's called, like a weighted plyometric, and then back down to a overspeed or high velocity. So the whole goal of this is to prime your system, begin with a heavy movement, and then to emphasize and get a lot of power development out of that. So that's what's happening in the French contrast phase of block down there. But before, we did some overcoming isometrics for himself for the floor bridge iso. So typically we start around 10 seconds and bring it down to like 5 towards the end. And the whole goal is to increase muscle connection and prime our central nervous system to recruit the most amount of muscle fibers and be as strong and powerful as possible. And then we went to French contrast training. So we did the trap bar deadlift, seated rocker jumps, seated weighted rocker jumps, and then band assisted vertical jumps. There's about 30 seconds rest in between. And then at the end, you take a full rest for that. And then we only have 2 days of French contrast training, and that's all I'd recommend that you do, because it is super demanding on your central nervous system. You may not feel like muscle sore, but if you did this for too long of a training block, you would essentially burn yourself out and you'd see your performance decrease. So we want to make sure we're using it at specific times and for a limited amount of time, and not just doing it all the time, because you will see that burnout. And then for our accessory, we did a hip dominant. Again, there's a lot of kettlebell swings in here, a lot of kettlebell swings, right? You're just trying to build a ton of explosive power from his hips. So we upped the reps a little bit, just to, again, increase that work capacity a little bit more. And then we paired that with some seated hamstring tantrums. So hip dominant hinge was the kettlebell swing, and then knee dominant hamstring here. And these are basically a rate of force development exercise where you're just being as rapid and like bending your legs as fast as possible, going back and forth, really focusing on that limb velocity and rate of force production. And then we moved into a resisted sled sprint, similar to the other sled sprint, but now he's dragging it behind him, really focusing on his lower body horizontal power, his speed. That'll help strengthen the ankle foot complex, and his overall elastic strength. And then phase 4 or day 2, we did the similar approach, but with upper body. So same thing, work through the force velocity curve. We did incline dumbbell bench press. Then we did some drop-in plyos with that. So he's having to absorb force and then get back out again, the amortization phase. We did some banded single arm jammer presses. So we had a jammer set on a rig. We had bands attached to it. So he's rotating through, punching through. So almost like those shot put throws, but now there's a little bit more weight and power that we're getting out of it. And then again, those banded explosive push-ups where it's aiding in his rate of force development. And then his back complex did a heavy strength movement. So seated grip, neutral row, heavy movement. And then we did some banded rapid speed single arm rows for 10 reps as fast as he can to improve his velocity and then that rate of force development. And then his conditioning was more of a upper body focus for today. So sledgehammer swings to get his rotational aspect in. Med ball slams is up to 15 reps. This one was brutal. And then renegade rows where he's doing a push-up row. So this was more for his glycolytic repeat power and starting to touch into his aerobic capacity. So before it was mainly the glycolytic and alactic a little bit. And now we're starting to extend it out into the aerobic capacity by adding in another exercise. So the duration of the conditioning is a little bit longer. And then the full body power, we did barbell jump squats, drop-in box jumps, banded pogo hops. So again, improve the amortization phase and peak power output. We're using about 10 to 20% body weight on the squat. And it's really about improving some of that elastic strength with them since we built so much strength earlier on. So he could be more well-rounded and have true power output. And then we went into our med ball power. So this is more full body and transfer power. So we had step back, lateral scoop toss, again, to work the transition, lateral coming forward, and then an overhead scoop toss for his posterior chain back, and an aspect there. And then our conditioning is his sled rope, pull to push. It's brutal, D-ball over the shoulder, and assault bike. And you can see at the end, this assault bike is 30 seconds. So we're pushing that aerobic or glycolytic capacity to the absolute brink before he goes back and changes into another exercise. So this is, again, aerobic and anaerobic capacity and some repeat power in there. And that was everything in his training block. And this was the results. It was him fucking winning it, getting a TKO. It was awesome to see. I mean, I loved working with him. And I mean, this stuff just works. It really does. And if you're someone who's a fighter, MMA, or just looking to improve their performance and what you just saw, like you're interested in what you just saw, and learning more and being able to train with me, because I do this training myself. I'm trying to go pro in rugby. And hundreds of other athletes that are using the system. When you join the Peak Performance program, you're going to get the monthly performance-based trainings working through similar phases just like this. And then we'll actually take care of some nutritional performance review with our certified nutritionist. We'll break down everything for you, give you the recommendations based on some symptoms and things that you have, what you should be adding or taking out of your diet. We do bi-weekly coaching calls and training. So we'll go in and I'll break everything down, have a training, whether it's around performance, recovery, training, specifics in the training, power, whatever it is. And then what I found is that people get the most help and support through actually getting their personal questions answered. So we leave a good amount of time for getting that Q&A there where I can go in and like literally give you exactly what you need to change in your program to improve, to keep progressing. You'll have a year's worth of programming already in there for you. You'll get instant access to it. And then I have my office hours, which I will be on for an hour every week, where you can come in And if you want more support, technique review, whatever it is, I'll be in there for you. Nutritional support, sleep, mindset, that's what I'm there for, to give you that training and that one-on-one support there. Like I mentioned, there's film and exercise technique and breakdown. There's a private athlete Facebook group where we'll be communicating. There will be challenges. There'll be different aspects. We'll be providing resources there and providing support there as well. And there's also an in-season training plan to keep you at your top of your game. So after you peaked, you want to maintain it during season. There's an actual 2-month training plan in there for you that you can just implement and use right away. And then there's specific sports conditioning workouts and protocols to help you dominate and stay in top shape throughout your game. And then there's weekly live mobility classes and a lot more in there. So if you're interested in that, you can just literally copy and paste that link right there at the bottom right hand of this presentation. It's www.athleteacademy.us/peak performance. And when you do, you will sign up and you'll get an email from me, and you'll have your onboarding call with me, and I'll get everything set up for you. I'll get to know you, your goals, and we'll get your training plan. I'll help you pick out which one exactly is going to work for you, and we'll get started. So if you're interested in that, just click that link below to the bottom right, or copy and paste it into your browser, and I'll see you on the inside. If not, I highly suggest that you start to implement some of this stuff, or that you start to look at some of the other resources and trainings that I have, so you can learn a little bit more about what goes into this and how it can actually help you increase your performance. So I hope this was super beneficial and helpful for all of you, and you got a lot out of it. And I'll keep seeing you on, message me on Instagram, whatever you guys need support. I'm here for you guys. But I'd love to see you guys inside that peak performance program. All right.